I would expect at least to have some traces of this morphosyntactic pattern, maybe in a different incarnation, in a different, developed into something, but not lost without any trace. That was 2 points. And basically this example was provided by me as a situation where you have a very rare typological pattern, and one way to account for this typological pattern would be to start from the not very common structure of the languages itself. If you have a very rare typological pattern spread at random at first glance in a family and not present in other families of the world, maybe that has to do something to do with other properties of the language that are shared by the whole family. So in my case, the mechanism was like that. You have a system of genders, gender agreement with the verb, not very common cross-linguistically. It's not, of course, it's not unique. Many languages have gender agreement of the noun phrase with the verb, but not so many. Much more have a person agreement with the verb. That's point one. Second, you have this idea of politeness shift, and when they overlap together, they may explain why the pattern is so unusual. You have two not very usual scenarios, but attested elsewhere. And in this family, they meet together and provide an unusual combination. That was the logic of the explanation, even though maybe the example was not that convincing. And to continue this line a little bit, to come back to the example of split recipient, of alternative recipient marking that I discussed yesterday, I wanted to say that there is a way to account why it is East Caucasian languages that have this strange pattern, and no other languages, or almost no other languages, except for the known example that I said was Tamil. Only Tamil shows this similar pattern. The reason is, as we know, recipient and goal are very closely connected semantic roles. And in many languages, goal marking develops into recipient marking, right? So they are both conceptual together and diachronical together. In many languages, in Turkic languages, for instance, you have the same marking, relative dative. And East Caucasian languages, which have a very intricate system of spatial relations, they do not only have dative, they also have a series of different latives, right? So they have a means to disentangle these two semantic roles. And these are languages which use this means. Similarly, Tamil and other Dravidian languages have separate datives and elatives. And they, again, use this option. While other languages, it's not necessary that if you have dative and lative, you would use this option to distinguish between recipiency, like giving to someone, and this lative strategy giving towards someone, handing to someone, right? It's not necessary, but you can do that on condition that you have dative and lative as separate entities. So again, here the same logic. You explain a relatively, or in this case, maybe quasi-unique patterns observed in the two languages. You explain them by a kind of background, common, typological profile of the family. That was the idea. Are you with me here? Okay, so we're done with this last time part. I wanted also to make, and so this is what I call fertile soil effect. If you have a typological profile, typological background, which helps you to do something, then you have a chance to do this. So this is what I call fertile soil. If you have gender agreement with the noun phrase, you may use it for politeness. If you have two different markers for lative and dative, you may use them to distinguish two types of transfer situations, as I discussed last time. Other problematic things, as you remember, I just wanted to remind you, something doesn't work here, okay, cool, is what, I don't know, maybe there is a bit better term I never came across, but that was the effect of substitutive inheritance, where you have the same pattern handed down. You remember this discussion of ordinals, right? You have the same pattern handed down from Proto-East Caucasian or from Proto-Branch level, which is fed up by different lexical material. And this is one of the explanations of the very strange phenomenon of ordinal formation, which is only observed again in this family and probably nowhere else. Yeah? This is one way to approach this explanation. I never thought about this actually before Alina and Vanya started discussing their problems with other people and came back to me with this kind of input, in this case from Yakov Tistilets. First I was kind of unconvinced, and now I understand that it's really hard to argue against this kind of explanation, right? As long as the combination of verb say and cardinal numeral remains a pattern, a phrasal pattern to convey the meaning of third or fourth, it may be handed down, feeding different lexical material into this pattern. That was the idea. Yeah, then I tried to suggest that some of the features that we observed, and specifically I thought it was a good explanation for the pattern of double recipiency, was chain bilingualism, because you can explain the spread of the dative versus later strategy in northern Daghestan by Avar influence. You have Avar as lingua franca, it may have imposed the same pattern on minor languages of the area. But you can't have, at least at the present moment, you can't have the same kind of explanation for South Daghestan, where the lingua franca was Turkic, and Turkic does not make this distinction. Okay, so that was the idea of chain bilingualism. Yeah, then this was something which I did not discuss yet, and probably will not, or not very much in detail. It's when you go to when you try to reconstruct the history of spread of features within the family rather than between the families, on family boundaries, it's really hard to argue that a phenomenon came, for instance, from Agul to Chirag-Garba, rather than from Lesbic branch to from Proto-Lesbic to Proto-Garba language, if it's really spread within both branches. Yeah. So this is what I would call interbranch transmission as a hypothesis alternative to what we usually think about spread of linguistic features. We usually think that here are the languages on the map, this language handed it over here, and so on and so on. But maybe it happened earlier. It's really hard when you deal with a phenomenon within the family. It's really hard to distinguish between these two kinds of scenarios. At what exactly historical level the contact occurred? Okay, and this final example we're just skipping right now. Maybe if I have time, which is unlikely, at the end of this class, I will come back to this. This is just a funny example of how the observed result of convergence may be not very easy to interpret, and you need to go a little bit into morphosyntax to see what happened. I call this reciprocal grammaticalization. I'm not sure again that whether this is a good term, but we will discuss it if we have time. Okay. So yeah, this research, as I mentioned, has been done together with different people. Also, surveys of this phenomena are available in recent paper by Timur and in the paper by Nina Yuropekov and myself to be published soon. So this I will just it was not something unknown. Okay, so I just collected some examples which are interesting to me from the point of view understanding of the underpinnings and mechanisms of language content. But so, as I promised, today we will go to the lexical part of the story. But before that, I wanted to make a bridge. And the bridge is a funny story about our last field season in Kach, area in. Let's see. I'm sorry, something happened to this curtain. Can you see the screen? Mm-hmm. There is a map here, which you can't see, obviously. This is Azerbaijan, roughly. This is southern Dagestan, and this part is called Kach region. Historically, there was a very strong presence of different Daghestanian people in this part of Dagestan. Not only in Kach region, but also a little bit to the north, the so-called Zakatalar region, Kekhi, I think, and not Kekhi, another word. So first time in our lives, we went there to collect some data. Basically, the idea was that we wanted to collect the data from the local dialect of Azerbaijani rather from standard dialect to understand, to better place lexical contact with southern Daghestan, because what you expect to find in southern Daghestan is, of course, not standard dialect of Azerbaijani, not southern dialect of Azerbaijani, not kind of north dialect of Azerbaijani close to the border, right? So we wanted to get some kind of lexical data to them. I was very peacefully collecting this list, and then suddenly comes a word like ala. I wanted you to listen to this, or maybe a little bit later. So when I asked how come you have these kinds of sounds, where do you have other words for this kind of sounds, and they came up with dozens of them, not so many. The list is absolutely not exhaustive, because I just asked them for other examples of this sound. So they gave things like tulum, tsitsi, puppet. Most adjectives appeared, no, it's actually all adjectives I encountered, appeared in nouns. They would not produce any verb. That may be due to different reasons. Maybe the verbs do not come to their minds that easily, but I think there might be really limited to nouns, which is important. So then I was very much impressed, and I asked a colleague who works on Azerbaijani and on Daghestani languages, and he didn't know about this, the presence of adjectives in Azerbaijani dialect in this part, but he came up with a reference very soon. He found a reference to an earlier study that discusses this presence of this sound type in this dialect in this part of Azerbaijani. And this thing rhymes very much with the long-acknowledged presence of adjectives in various dialects of Kumyk, the Turkic language of eastern Dagestan, of the lowlands, let's say, and in Ossetic. So if in Kumyk it only spread to some dialects, in Ossetic it's a part of standard language. So the area of Kah contains a now not very big village of Ilisu. Ilisu was the center of Ilisu Sultanate up to, well, during several centuries, and it is believed or known to be dominated by Sapurs. So it was obvious that the presence of these adjectives and the words, probably the words themselves, were somehow connected to Sapur. So Ilisu speakers themselves indicated that these were elements from the local dialect of Azerbaijan. It was not even used in Kah, which is a village dominated by Azerbaijanis now, some Georgians, but not local Sapurs. Non-Ilisu speaker in Kah would say, well, we've heard these words. Some of them were known with them, but they said specifically again that these are used by those who come from the Ilisu village. And then we went right after our visit to Kah region. We went back to Daghestan, where we usually go, and of course I tried to. Well, the first thing I tried was to try to look in the dictionaries of Sapur, and I found some of these words. And then I just started to check all of these words with Sapur speakers in Mikik, and they acknowledged them as regular Sapur words. What was important, one thing, maybe that's next slide, I just put it into words. What was important was, first, the speakers in Kah who produced these words in no way associated these words with Sapur presence. They said it was Azerbaijani dialect, period. I was asking them, those with whom I was talking, do you have any Sapur relatives or Sapur pedigree behind you? They said, no. One more accommodating lady said, well, who knows, Sapur lived here. So maybe, Sapur's lived here. So maybe I have some connections to Sapur. The other guy was saying very explicitly, I'm not that Sapur. I have no connections to Sapur. And this is partly due to the pressure coming from Azerbaijani at the state level to put down all kind of Sapur, Rutul, Avar ethnicities in the area. it cannot be done fully, but it seems that there was a strong pressure from the state to some kind of erase the ethnic man. So my first thought was that there might be, actually we don't know, in other important things. The first thing is that people who use these adjectives in the local dialect believe that these are elements of Azerbaijani, of local Azerbaijani. They do not connect it in any way to Daghestani history of the area. Second, they would not acknowledge that they themselves come from background, from type of background. The third thing was an occult. I just prepared some recordings for you to. I hope it will be. You can hear it.
Так, это мы записываем сферу, несколько слова с объективом. Доска для раскатывания теста.
Доска для раскатывания теста – это кам. Называем кам.
Можно 3 раза сказать. Вот, допустим, так, вот, если я говорил, это вот так. Доска, 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 чтобы 3 раза было слышно хорошо.
Доска.
И нет.
Кам, кам, кам. И кроме этого, который скатывается тестом, это калянчик. Калянчик.
So I didn't know, at the moment that I was referring to this word, I didn't know about the other word. So he came up with this second word himself. So the first word was, I don't know the English words actually. The thing on which you roll the dough, how do you call it in English?
Rolling pin.
No, it's rolling pin was the second word. The first
Board.
what? Yeah, board word. Yeah, right. So the first term was for board, the second term was for rolling pin, and most of other words were kind of, you know, utensils or things used in everyday life, nothing abstract, just things that you, so coming from the roots of the press, right? But the other thing was, I wanted to let you hear this second example also, because it's important.
Можно сказать кацай, кацай, кацай.
Yeah, here comes the important one. So I was in my list of the words that I recorded with an adjective with other speakers was that one, which is a word for cough. You hear unmistakably again an adjective, right? But the problem is, at the moment I came to Sahur area in Daghestan, and I asked about this word. No, there is no such word. We say just dana. And then something, I stopped understanding what's going on. So I looked in the dictionary for the first time, in the Azerbaijani dictionary, and I found out that that this is a standard Azerbaijani word for cough, which is dana. And then, so at the moment, maybe when I was recording this guy in cough, I already knew that. So my second question was, how do you say the same word in standard language? So again, he says in local dialect, he says it like that. This is local variant. And now standard. Please stand. Which is an absolutely different sound dialect. Okay? And when I was going back and forth through my list again, I understood that some of these words that were actually Azerbaijani, Turkic word of words of Turkic origins, which means a different pattern, a different story of adjectives in this area. This means not only that they've imported some words from local Tsahurs after they got rid of them. But also there was so this is here. Importantly, at some point in their linguistic history, they were perceiving Azerbaijani voiced as adjectives. And occasionally I started to discuss that yesterday with Adem Gülayev, who is an expert in Ossetic. I asked him whether he knows anything about the origins of adjectives in Ossetic. He said, well, it's an obscure story, one has to do with it. But in the discussion he mentioned that some of the Ossetic adjectives come to correspond to voiced in the Dona language. This is, for the moment, that's the end of the structural linguistic story. I don't know what to do with this further yet, where I'm thinking about what to do. One last purely linguistic comment that I wanted to make here is that at least in Rutul, a closely related sister language to Tsahur, there are in fact no really voiced sounds. What they have is that what they have orthographically, they have voiced adjectives and voiceless. But in fact, their voiced are voiced to a very low degree. It could be considered as halfway to the distinction between unaspirated, aspirated, and adjective. And so I strongly suspect this is somehow the reason why a different sound type, a sound type different from what they have, was perceived in the loans, or some, not in the loans, perceived by Tsahur speakers as adjectives and not as voice. I suspect this is the reason, but I don't know yet how the thing works. Yeah.
Clarification question: what is it in Tsahur you said, but I forgot? Is it Ana or Dana?
Dana. Why?
Because Tsahur you would expect it to be with an adjective.
Yeah, it is adjective. Ana. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that's okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. The Tsahurs the traces of Tsahur influence in Kah have it as Ana. The standard Azerbaijani has it as Dana. And that was the other interesting part of the story. The Tsahur speakers of Daghestan would also produce it as Dana. So they introduced it in their language more in the standard norm. So something different things happened in Tsahur of Azerbaijan and Tsahur there. So maybe these were different patterns of bilingualism. And one thing for that is that at this moment I don't have a scenario to suggest, but there are different scenarios which may lie behind this story. First, these guys may be ethnically Tsahurs, all of them Tsahurs, who shifted at some point to Azerbaijani, and they brought in some lexical items with adjectives, and they also brought in but then it's not very clear why in their local variant of Azerbaijani, the standard, the dialectal one would be introduced as an adjective. So maybe it's a different story. Maybe it's not Tsahur speaker, but Azerbaijani speakers who were under strong influence from Tsahur, the other way around. And the realization of their Azerbaijani voiced was influenced by the local Tsahur realization of the Azerbaijani laws. And so these came down through kind of the history of first, and this is historically plausible because this part of Azerbaijan was strongly dominated by Tsahurs. So Tsahurs were majority here, and Azerbaijani probably were minority. They were shifting to Azerbaijani, but Tsahurs were shifting to Azerbaijani, to the language of the local minority, but the properties of this local variety traveled to the new variety. So that would be my best guess, but I have to admit that I have to look again at the list to see what exactly are the words which come from standard Azerbaijani, what exactly are the words which came from Tsahur. Sakur and so on. Yeah, that would be my best possible guess. Maybe you have some other ideas, because that's, yeah.
Just wanted to point out that Ethiopian grammatic languages are also correspondences between voiced and plosives and ejective. Direction used to be from voiced and plosive to ejective.
Yeah, I think that has to do with one voice at a time, but I can't make it out. Yeah, I have to think more about it. Because the whole story of Rutul stop system is about strange patterns in voice and set time. They have more or less the same voice and set time for ejectives and voice and aspirated, strangely. Very similar, but very different for non-aspirated. Okay? Good. So this is the end of this story. And this is a bridge to my discussion of lexical influence. Yeah, sorry.
Did you get the standard Azerbaijani for the other words that have adjectives as well?
Not for all of them. Some of them are clearly Tzapur, and most of them are clearly Tzapur, as far as I understand.
Okay.
So what happened, I think, is that this is another interesting part of the same story, actually. So if in their local variety of Tzapurs, the adjectives were all standard voiced were substituted by adjectives in their realization. Why not all of the words which came down from, to nowadays Azerbaijani dialect are like that? Why most of them are standard? And that's, I think that's obvious, because words like Tana, which are words of everyday life, of what you do every day, like how, you zoom down, you milk cow, and so on. They came on in the same right, together with Tzapur words. Yeah. Okay. So they were in Tzapur variety, local Tzapur variety, and then they, during the shift, they have been inherited by local Azerbaijani dialect, while other words were converging with the standard, or maybe they have been, borrowed from some of them have been borrowed from the standard. Yeah.
So I think we just played this out, but I don't think you commented on it, that in the standard variety that the Bach speakers imagine, it is Tana, it is not Dana.
It is not Tana either. It's something else. Okay. And this is another thing which I didn't do, and which I regret very much. I should have recorded local pronunciation. I did one recording of it, but not enough. The local realization of actually the local phonetics of the local dialect of non-Ilisu speakers, because these non-Ilisu speakers may show other divergences from standard language. That's the data I listed. So other data I have in more or less sufficient quantities, but this data, the local variety of non-Ilisu speakers of Azerbaijan, is something I missed.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Okay. So now I wanted to we discussed that. Now I wanted to make what I actually promised for these two lectures, to make an overview of the method that we are working on for quantifying lexical content. But because I realized at some point that lots of this data has been discussed in posters by Ilya Chichura, Samira Fabers, and myself, and by Samira Fabers, and lots of you, at least the professor, were supposed to read all the posters. So I tried to reduce the amount of overlap in this presentation and the data they presented, although there will be some overlap. Okay. So these are two posters by these two authors, which basically deal with the application of the same method. I wanted to focus more on the protocol of the data collection and on some methodological issues, and maybe to have your inputs, because we already had a very insightful but not very useful, unfortunately, input from Masha, who said that we should do these kind of things, and it is, I mean, out of question that we can do that. Not on practical reasons, but on methodology. I will talk about that. As I mentioned in the first lecture, Daghestan is of course a playground for lexical contact between various languages. There are different layers in time of lexical contact, probably first of all from Iranian, then from Turkic, also cultural borrowing from Arabic. There are some core borrowings in terms of Hasbanot and Tadmor, not necessarily core vocabulary, basic vocabulary, but core borrowings, not as opposed to cultural borrowings. Replacements in a sense. Replacements from Turkic and Iranian. There is also certainly lexical exchange with locally important, or not so important, languages, even at the level of local small-scale multilingualism. We will see that in a second. And everybody knows that. There are tons of publications on that, dealing with lists of borrowings or of Arabic borrowings, because this is culturally important. So it's all books contain lots of discuss lots of Arabic borrowings to all Daghestani languages, also Turkic and Iranian. But how to translate it into some kind of quantitative data that we can deal with? So we would like to answer questions like, is the impact of different donor languages, major donor languages, like Turkey, different in different areas of Daghestan, right? Or can we say something about the dynamics of the spread of lexical influence in micro area through the villages? Can we make any claims about how the borrowing processes advances through the villages? What is the way it follows? Can we make any generalizations about that? If this kind of data can in principle be done on the level, with the help of dictionaries of the languages, this is already impossible because you have to have data on very local level, very localized data from different dialects of the language. And there are certainly no way to have dictionaries of all dialects of all Daghestani languages. So our practical goal was to establish some kind of metric to compare, to quantify lexical influence. So that we could compare the impact of language A on language B to language C on language D, as for instance, comparing the lexical influence of, as I said, Arabic in different areas of Daghestan. And importantly, we wanted also, so it's almost invisible, but I can't do anything about this curve. Can you read something on it? Okay. What we wanted, especially wanted to do, because we were involved in this big scale project of small scale bilingualism, we wanted to trace traditional patterns of bilingualism through lexical influence, to correlate the result of one project with lexical influence. So in a sense, we wanted to focus on small scale multilingualism, even if it's not yet done, but I will discuss the problems connected to it. Yeah, okay. Sorry. So we wanted to compile a small list of lexical items to be collected in various languages, and then of course we look back to another list which has been collected from multiple languages, which is World Loan Database list by Hasselmann and Dagmar and many contributors in one specific language. In a sense, we wanted to do the same, because, for instance, if you look at the data on two East Caucasian languages, which is present in World, which are Archi and Daghestan, you immediately see some kind of difference between presence. So you have Turkic influence, very similar in Archi and Daghestan, 21 and 19. For Avar, you have a much stronger influence in Daghestan than in Archi. In Georgian, you have 0 borrowings from Georgian in Archi, but 63 from in Daghestan, and that's obvious because Daghestan is on the border with Georgian. So if you remember the map, the Tzetic languages were right on the border with Georgian, and there was very strong contact with them, with Georgians. when we were to the area, they would say that sometimes they would, if they wanted a decent suit, they would go to Tbilisi to buy it. That was much easier to do than to go anywhere else. Which reminds me about a famous saying by Daghestan, where you can get a decent shirt. But that's another story. For luck, that's a symmetrical. Yeah.
So, really is not very important for me, but in case you have, let's say, a word that could have passed into the language also from another language, for example, you have an Arab word, but you don't know if this passed into this language from another communication.
Yeah, right. That's absolutely important, and that's something which is very hard to deal with, and I will discuss that later as one of the methodological issues. So you have a symmetrical situation. You have a strong presence of Georgian in Daghestan, with no presence in Archi. But you have a relatively strong presence of Lak in Archi, without any presence of Lak in Daghestan. And this is again something which we would expect, because in Archi, where we have quite a lot of data, we see that traditional bilingualism was high in Lak. Not extremely high, but pretty high in Lak, because one of the two villages close to Archi was Lak village. That one was Avar, and one of them was Lak. And then for Russian, you have an interesting effect, and we don't know how to explain it. There are twice as many Russian borrowings in the world list from Russian in Daghestan, but only 60 in 120 in Daghestan and only 60 in Archi. So there should be some kind of interpretation. This is obviously significant, but we don't know. Yeah.
So again, to my unverifiable hypothesis, this could be borrowings from Avar. There's a very big number of Avar borrowings from this.
Yes. So in our method, we try to take care of this, and that provided. We will see whether they provide comparable results. But it's not very clear the principles on which the authors of World, Majid Khalilov for Daghestan, Majid Khalilov and Komri for Daghestan, and Marina Chumakina for Archi, what were the exact principles they would place the language. That was one of the problems of the project, actually. They were never sure whether they say this language comes from Russian and this comes from... that brings back to this question. Through the mediation of Georgian or direct. We try to take care of that, as you know. Maybe those of you who discussed Ilya's Foster with him, maybe you noticed that we try to take care of this. And at least at this scale, at this large scale, Russian versus Georgian. So, the problem of world database for us, it's very big. It's a very, very long word list. So it takes time to collect it. It takes, well, I would say a couple of days to collect it in a proper way. While what we are doing, as Nina maybe described you, how we work in the area, we are very rapidly moving from place to place. So we don't have much time. Second, of course, for the reasons very understandable, world had lots of highly technological items like gasoline, or local items like totally irrelevant for Daghestan, like I don't know, kangaroo or waistband or something. As a result, this kind of list is probably connected only once per language. While we think that it will be important to collect the same list several times to see, to compare the dispersion of the, I'm using a technical term, we didn't really control the dispersion, but qualitatively try to control how stable is our result in terms of local numbers. Also, in some cases, and I suspect in Marina's case, that was based on her dictionary and not on items collected afresh. And dictionaries, as you also might guess, might have a bias towards native lexicon, even if some kind of load is used. So that was another problem. So what we did was a small collection of world nouns. Nouns obviously because nouns are much easily borrowed, and that we needed some kind of borrowable items. Located in the middle of the hierarchy, so that they are not too stable or not too globalizing, right? So no gasoline, no hand. Somewhere in between. Things like come or broom or things like that. And another thing was that we didn't want any words which are really difficult to elicit, and to be sure that we elicit the correct word. And I come to that later again, because some of the words that we actually thought would be easy to elicit were not unambiguous in the end. Okay, maybe I give this example right now. One of the words that we used was broom. What's your word for broom? And I suddenly realized in this last season that some discrepancies between the items that they provided were actually semantic discrepancies and not just multiple lexical choice what we wanted to find. Because in one cases, when we started showing them pictures, it turned out that the word "vening" in their language might be related not only to a small thing that you hand. I don't know what's the English word for that. Broom is a big thing, yeah, like with a big handle, and a small and vening is a much smaller thing for house thing. Brush. Okay, yeah. It's not like I thought brush was for table for piano, but for floor, for the floor. Is it brush?
It's that big, it's really bigger than the
It's this big?
No, it's that high.
Okay.
That high.
Uh-huh.
You hand it like that.
I'd say broom, maybe.
Brush. Okay. So brush versus broom, and that came as an unpleasant surprise to me that some of the words we collected as brush was actually broom. I only realized that when we started showing pictures. So these kind of things, yeah. We try to minimize the complexities of elicitation so as to make the process more smooth and more quick. Originally it was 250 words, then it shrank mostly because of these complexities to about 150. Maybe it will slightly shrink further, but we will see. I still am unsure about some of the items. So this is a table which shows you the numbers, the absolute numbers of the occurrences of the. So what we did at the first step, we compared what we get from a full list for Daghestan and from our list for Daghestan. You're not supposed probably, or you can't see the numbers here, but maybe you can see them here. So when you go from world list, the big list, yeah, where you count the percentage of the Turkic loans in the full world list, when you go to that loans, you get an increase from 2 to 4. In Turkey, for Daghestan, you go from 1 person to 3. For Russian, you have 5% of loans in world and 5% of loans in that loans, in the short loans. For Daghestan, you have more or less the same, a higher percentage, but it keeps the same. So whatever happens, the percentage increases. It does not increase that drastically as I would like it to increase. I was hoping for a better performance of those, but at least it saves us time, because you have more or less the same numerical results as collecting the full list, or better results, more representative, slightly more representative borrowing rates by collecting a smaller list than by collecting a big list, right? So also we tried to keep to adhere to some kind of data collection protocol. We tried to imagine where cycle interest, or slightly to this side, but not really. Unfortunately, I'm not a psychologist, but we tried to make it some kind of protocol. So we asked the respondent to translate a word. If the respondent resembles several words, we write them, all of them. The whole interview is recorded, unless I forgot to press the button, which happens several times. Several respondents recorded in each village to see how stable the result is. As I said, you record the same word list from several people in the same village. At this stage, this summer, we decided to try to have 4 male representatives from each village. One of the elder cohort between 60 plus, and the other 2 from the younger cohort, 35 to 50, to see how stable the results are. Yeah, to see how stable the results are across cohorts. Is there any dynamics of the change of the presence? But these results cannot be yet presented because they are only being processed. And also in Kina, the village where we are, in a sense, based, we go there for every year for several weeks. There we collected like about 15 questionnaires representing both genders to compare across genders and more evenly represented age to see whether there is. So the idea is that the assumption is that if we have this kind of good coverage from one village, we can extend the result and make predictions about what our smaller coverage makes in other villages based on the analysis of this result. So, for instance, if we see that there is no strong difference between men and women, we can also report women later if it's easier than men. If we see that there is no big difference between across ages, then we don't care about ages. We report whoever we come across, which is much easier. It's really, if you have to think about, if you go to a village and say, okay, find me a person who is local, never went away for a long time from the village, who is about 60 plus, whatever, older than 60, and then your helper comes back with a person who is 58. And say, oh, I'm sorry, you're too young for me. That's some kind of awkward situation. So in this case, we sometimes have to record this 58-year-old person just not to offend him, for instance. Yeah, right? So it's not very easy to keep to this kind of things in the village, especially if you are there for half a day, which happened. Ilya made, last year, Ilya Chuchura made sometimes 3 villages in one day. Together with his, they were 4, they were not alone, but they were pretty quick. Okay, so, I'm sorry, you can't see the coverage, but basically all these dots are villages which have been covered. So quite a few. I thought maybe it's the best slide in my presentation. It's impressive. Even though some of these points, something that you can't see, these are good points where we collected for elder male speaker, for younger, 2 elder speaker and 2 younger speaker, and others are not that good because we did not establish this kind of protocol at that point. That comes from previous years. And so, for instance, we need to establish some kind of protocol to see how reliable our previous results are to compare them. Okay. Okay. So this, I will probably go quickly through this part because that's something I have until 1:30, right? Yeah. I will try to maybe to be quicker here because some of you saw this part in my presentation. This is one of the areas where we worked. Urtul in southern Daghestan. There are several languages which has been recorded here. Ahti Lesbian, local dialect of Lesbian. Urtul that I mentioned, Zakur that I mentioned in the story of Kaf area. And then there are also major languages, Azerbaijani. There is also a Lak village, one single Lak village, and one single Avar village, but they are kind of at the outskirts of the region and not presumably. Okay. I even think that I made one recording of the loan list, of the DAG loan list in the Avar village. That's a beautiful village, which is not the only village in my time, in my life, which is not reachable by car. So you need to go there on foot. I don't think that there are many other villages like that in Dagestan nowadays. But this village is still unreachable. You have to walk there, about 10 kilometers of road. But nice walk. Okay. It's not a problem. It's not like 100 kilometers, not in the north. Going from one, Nganasan group to another. But still, it's strange, and that was a new experience for me, and that is why this specific Avar village is practically uninhabited. That has been abandoned by most people, only 2 families live there. But very nice families. That's a very common effect in Daghestan actually. If you go to a village where only 2-3 families are, they are so nice that someone came to see them. They put all their attention on you. It's much different from what we have in bigger villages. Okay, anyway. Yeah. Oh sorry, this slide should, maybe I'll come back to this slide later. So just to recapitulate the results that we got from this area, I won't go into detail. We made clustering analysis, and that has to be discussed also the technicalities of clustering analysis. Maybe it should be slightly adjusted. But the important thing here, okay, so what kind of theoretical claims I was hoping to do based on this empirical data? I was thinking, what if it turns out that in the village closest to the linguistic border, you have a set of loans, and if you move to the next village, then you have a subset of loans observed in the first village. So the farther you go into the area where a language is spoken, of course, well, one of the assumptions was that the lowest is the number of the loans, but also, you know, subsetting in each second step. And that would be a very interesting result, because then I would claim that, for instance, Azerbaijani lexical input in the inner villages of Rutu are mediated by outer villages. So the lexical influence is handed over from village to village. That was something I was hoping to see. I didn't see it, sorry. Or maybe I didn't find the correct instruments to see it yet. Maybe we will see that, but not now. But what we saw was another interesting result. So even if there is no subsetting things, it seems that speakers from the same village cluster together as opposed to different villages. And different villages, different dialects of the language cluster together as opposed to another language. So this is the clustering system here. And this is only about loans. It's not about lexical divergence. It's about convergence. So it's Turkic presence in local lesbic languages, and it shows that the set of loans in the speaker A from the Mets is more similar to the speaker M and T from the same village of the Mets than to the speakers A from Mikik, from a neighboring village of Mikik, or from the speaker N from the neighboring village of Mikik. Which means another, I think, very important implication. It means that the loan processes follow their own paths in each village. There is no common path of all rural speakers to adopt some kind of loans. They do not negotiate their loans between the villages. They negotiate these loans within the village. Yeah? I think this is an interesting result of this story that proves to be, I mean, if no one comes and say your clustering analysis is bullshit. So far we are where we believe in this data, and this is something which is more or less repeated in other data. So you have this kind of data for Turkic influence in these villages, but also you have a very similar clustering system, even a little bit blurred. Some speaker would suddenly go to another cluster, but more or less in general. Hopefully you don't see it on this slide because there is too much light. But if you would be able to see that, then you would see that some of the speakers are not where they're supposed to be. But on the whole, it seems that they cluster together also through, if we apply the lesbian influence, which is totally different, right? So lesbian influence. Lesbian influence is a locally important language. Azerbaijani is a globally important language in the area, and clustering of speakers, both in terms of loan words from Azerbaijani and from lesbian, work the same way. Another result that Ilya got was exactly the correlation between the distance of the village from the border and the level of lexical influence. Of course, we first try to correlate the presence of lexical influence not with the distance, but with the level of bilingualism that we have from other villages. But strangely enough, and this is something I cannot explain, the correlation was higher with the distance, even though the distance was calculated, as Ilya probably explained in his poster, with a kind of, how do you say that? Linear. The what? Ruler, yeah, with the ruler. So you put a Google ruler on thing, which doesn't correspond basically to anything. It does correspond to any kind of real trajectory that the speaker would follow. But still, for some reason, this very abstract distance was a better predictor than level of bilingualism. I don't know why. I think that we have to think about that because we need to make sense of the level of bilingualism rather than distance. Maybe that's because bilingualism is something that changed over time, and we have a relatively late stage of this bilingualism, only like beginning of the 20th century, while distance changes sometimes, but not so strongly. That's not a very acceptable kind of area, not something like Marcus talking about now. Okay, so now I wanted to focus. This is I just recapitulated some of the results. I wanted to to accentuate some of the things which seem to be interesting in this result. But now I wanted to make explicit the problems of the method. Some of them are practical and can be read off in principle, but some of them are more methodological, and maybe here we can have a small discussion at the end of the class. So, first of all, we're not experts in all the languages that we visit. And the phonetics of these languages, even if I said at the very beginning of the lecture that this is more or less similar, it's not the same phonetics, right? So I think that I have a good ear for Archie phonetics, maybe for. I do not have generally I don't have a very good ear. I have a better ear for Archie phonetics or for Rutul phonetics than for example, for Sahur phonetics or for Cesic phonetics. Cesic languages have got nasalization, which is very weak, really very weak, which I don't hear very much. And different languages have very different types of pharyngealization, and you also are supposed to know how it works on the phonological level rather than just by ear. And that's something which you lose when you do this kind of. I like to think about that in terms of you remember this method bracket and anonymous, this term introduced by Labov in his study of the supermarkets. So you don't do any kind of deep interview. You collect the data very very quickly and hope that quantities of the data would kind of even the level the number of mistakes. So inaccuracy in translation, as I mentioned, so the probability is still there that some of people would not simply understand what we mean by Russian words, and that's a very common assumption. So if you go to a Daghestan villages, they all absolutely bilingual in Russian, or most of them. Elderly people may have problems, but most of the speakers with whom we deal are absolutely bilingual, very fluent in Russian. And so you assume kind of they are speaking Russian, just the same as I do. So I give them a warning to produce some kind of okay, I put it down. But in fact, it turns out that they, by gaming, they meant a broom or something like that, which is something unexpected. Or for instance, another strange case is the word for oats, avesda. Oats, yeah. Which, well, I have a very vague idea, to tell the truth, how it looks. So I only know that it's fed to. My best guess is that you have to say that it's something that you give as a food to horses. But in the end, it turned out that some of them thought it was ichmein, because ichmein is also a good food for horses. So it's, what's ichmein?
Barley.
What?
Barley.
Barley, yeah, barley, yeah. So that's some kinds of misunderstandings on different levels between the researchers and the speakers. And these are inevitable in this kind of rapid and anonymous kind of study. Also, we started, and we still do that. We compared standard Azerbaijani to local languages while it's obvious that they're mostly influenced by closest Azerbaijani dialect, and that's why basically I went to Kah, to try to collect a better background lexical data for comparison. But for instance, for Lesbian, we are very much aware of this fact. So for Lesbian, we specifically collected not only data from dictionaries, but also from the local Lesbian village of Khlut, to be able to compare. Maybe you've seen that on Yulia's charts, that he has separately Lesbian Den, Lesbian dictionary, and separately the Lesbian of Khlut. And they prove to be different. Lesbian of Khlut proves to be closer in terms of Azerbaijani influence to the local languages. Yeah, okay. So these are practical issues. Yeah, one day you can overcome them. If you have like 200 people working on this project, they would go to all the villages, they would collect all local dialects, they would be better trained in transcription, and so on and so on. There are deeper problems with this method, which I wanted to discuss, and that's something which that was not done during postmodern. One of them is that it's really very hard to distinguish cognates and loans between closely related languages. And sometimes impossible, because if you don't have sound change, then we will never be sure whether it's a cognate or lexical. And even if there is some kind of lexical, of sound divergence between the two languages, then you have to dive very deeply into historical phonetics, which we're not historical phoneticians first, compared to linguists, and second, no other people probably dug that to provide robust results of comparison between closely related languages. So that's problem number one. If you compare Rutul and Sapur and see the similar word, we assume that this word is a cognate without further analysis. If it's very similar, we assume it's a cognate, while it may in fact be loan from Sapur to Rutul or vice versa. That's one thing, which provides you with some kind of possible underestimate of lexical. Yeah, this is the question that has been raised first by Masha months ago and then by you. Can we be sure that a lesbian loan came to Sapur, which is not in direct geographical adjacency relation to lesbian, directly because they were bilingual in lesbian, or through mediation of Rutul, which lies between them? Or can we be sure that something came from Azerbaijani even to Sapur directly and not through some kind of local lexical exchange? I would, in this case, basically I would be probably more optimistic. But as we showed before, that there is a difference between villages, right? So like lexical impact comes differently, in separate processes to different villages. Why should we think that some of it, or a lot of it, should be mediated to a different language? Yeah, right. So it's not very probable according to the data we have. But still, there is this problem. But most important is that, so we started by saying we have the same list collected from different languages of the area, and we compare lexical influence by the numbers in this list. But how can we be sure that the probability of borrowing a specific lexical item is the same across this area? So if you think that the same problem as with Walt, you think that you have a borrowability overview of lexical items through the world, but what you actually have is a kind of average for borrowability across all these areas. And it's very expectable, I think it's even expectable that a word for, I'm not sure about the specific example, but a word for knife would be more borrowable probably in Eurasia, for instance, than in Australia or something like that, right? I don't know whether anyone has done this kind of job. That would be interesting. To split the data of world. I think that I vaguely remember someone did it. Split world data by continents, for instance, and compare the variability scales between the continents. And I'm pretty sure that there will be systematic discrepancy between these results. So, why are we so sure that the same fact is not true here? So we are saying that, look, we have the same word list for South Daghestan, North Daghestan. You have more Turkic loans no, Turkic are more or less the same. You have more, Turkic loans of ROK are of course more present in South Daghestan than in North Daghestan. But are these numbers to be trusted in the sense that the same words tend to be taken from Turkic languages in the south and in the north? And is it level? Do you see what I mean? So it might happen that our list, our present list, includes more of these items that are likely to be borrowed by a southern language from a Turkic language than those words which are universally, in the universal lexicon of these languages, are likely to be borrowed from the Turkic in the north. And this is something, maybe I didn't think well about it yet, but this is something that the effect that I cannot exclude. So the only thing that I may hope for is that the words that we have chosen have more or less the same status across this small area. At least we're on a safer side than the world. Because this is a small area and culturally pretty homogeneous, as Nina told, right? So we would expect more or less the same behavior of lexical items through the list. And if there are some unexpected things, then we may attribute this to chance than to some kind of systematic things. So I think that here we can only hope for this and take this as an assumption and can never probably prove this. Okay, so we have, this is all that I wanted to say. We have two options. Either we have 10 minutes. I may either go back to the case of reciprocal grammaticalization if you want, or may discuss this last part, whichever you want. If there is some points for discussion, if you have some input, we can discuss it now, or else I will go to those slides. But these are only an interesting case of grammaticalization, which again shows you that contact may work in the ways in which contact words cannot be known. So, should we go back or discuss? Okay, very good. Those of you who still have the handouts from yesterday, we looked at them, but it's not necessary because I have these examples visible here. Okay, so there's a category of, this is the end of verificative, with which we ended yesterday. The next category that I wanted to plan to discuss yesterday, but was too slow for that, was apprehensive. I don't know whether everybody is acquainted with the term. This is a category of warning, grammaticalized warning. Very close to English lest, for instance. Lest is an apprehensive construction or apprehensive particle, right? Don't go out lest someone see you, or something, right? So, so grammaticalized warning, one thing to remember now. So far, apprehensive are just in 3 languages of Daghestan, which in this case are pretty local. You don't find it very different there. It's not the case of Nach, Dagba, and Archie. There's Archie and Lingua, which is not very good. Akhlaq is also roughly north of Daghestan. I will come to this later. This is not a contiguous area, but this can be explained. These markers are non-cognate in the 3 languages. There is marker Lukut in Archie, Allah in Lingua, and Akhlaq, Allah. We can't be sure. Again, I'm not a comparative language, but they don't look alike at all, and there are good etymologies for some of them, or good probabilities for etymology for some of them. The indicated apprehensives do not seem so far to be attested in other languages, though a word of caution, the 3 languages that I mentioned here are 3 languages with which Nina worked personally. So she was looking for apprehensives, maybe there are more apprehensives elsewhere, right? People are not so looking out for apprehensives in the field, usually. None of these languages are in direct conflict with each other, but the possible bridge between the 3 languages would be Avar again. And in those cases we discussed before, like person via gender, of course there is no person in Avar, so Avar cannot serve as a bridge. But for Avar, for some other languages of the area, a form which is called negative purpose has been described. And negative purpose is usually one of the functions of apprehensives. So, not to. He removed the hay so that it not be hit by rain, for instance. Yeah? So it's kind of negative purpose. And this construction has been described for Avar for some other languages, so we might suspect that this is kind of what I would call under-described apprehensive, right? So it's described in one of its functions, but not in the other functions. Okay? Sorry. So very quickly, this is an example of independent user apprehensive here. The wolf might get the sheep. Beware, beware. Very often put together with the particle beware. The wolf might get the sheep. And so what we know about apprehensive here is that it could derive from the verb see, which is a very common cross-linguistic pattern. Apprehensive very commonly, like in Russian, смотри, не упади. Or in English you have this kind of apprehensive non-grammatical construction, look that, see that, something like that, yeah. Right, it's not, see to that, it's not really apprehensive, but it's close to it. Yeah, okay, so Russian is close, смотри, не упади. And if it's true, then the construction is like that. You have le, which is not etymologizable. Then you have ku, which is the grammatically morphologized root of the verb see. And then this is the participle marker, which is important. Will be important just in a few seconds. Next, merweb, the form in Allah. No one knows where it comes from. I discussed that yesterday and the day before yesterday with specialists in Daghestan. They provided several options, but none of them seem to be very convincing for themselves. So this is a particle with an element of the non-variable etymology, and as in Archie, it is also used in subordinate clause with what we call as negative purpose. So that not. Lastly, in Afaf, there is a form which has been described by Denis Crisel as categorical prohibitive or something, but functions in context of apprehensives. Actually, what we think that Denis meant, and we discussed it with Denis, that he meant what he meant by categorical prohibitive was more or less apprehensive meaning. And this is typical apprehensive concept. Be aware that dog might like. What we know about this form is that it is not used in subordinate clauses, not negative purpose first, and it probably comes from a kind of politicization of an apprehensive particle, which is still there in the language.
Is it a whole? Because we have
yeah, whole is a reduced form of the same particle, but it's not very clear. In neither of these cases, it's very clear. Also for Archie, it's only my hypothesis. By the way, the form u, which has been used there, is the same grammaticalized root which has been used in the verificative, but in a different function. A different passive grammaticalization. These languages seem to like very much to grammaticalize their verbs into some kind of verbal element. Okay, no subordinate uses. Now, let's look at these two examples. This is the use of apprehensives in subordinate clauses. Musa gathered hay out of field that it may rain. The mother worried that the child might get lost in the woods. What is... They may be slightly different semantically. But let's forget about this in a moment. I don't really think it's important. what's important is the glossing and the structure of this clause. What is different between these two examples? Can you see it? No. Probably not. Those of you who still have handouts are lucky, Masha?
Still handouts here.
Ah, yeah, okay, so there are handouts over there. So what is importantly different about these two constructions? Anyone sees that?
No, but I can see it.
Oh, okay. Those who can't see. I would already know. So.
The modality part?
Say it again?
Modality part, the reality?
No, that's just a morphological, convention. That's a realis stem, which is a very abstract notion. It's not relative. Masha?
It's not quite a reported speech construction, the second one, but there's a verbal, internal psychological state.
Where? Actually?
14, yes. So it's a different type of complementation.
I need a more superficial observation. Say again? The main clause, in both cases, the main clause is the mother word and mother musa gathered. What? The verb form here, yeah, but that's just a different structure of the respective language, nothing specific. The important thing is about subordination. You don't have a complementizer in archi, but you do have a complementizer in web, right? That's an important thing. Why is it so important? Because, in fact, if you look, no complementation in archi. So apprehensive is subordinated without complementation. That's very typical for Daghestani languages, actually. They do not use complementizers. Something is wrong with this ile thing. And now you can see in the second, maybe in the handouts it's already there, the complementizer which is used in this case is a converb of the verb say. And this parallels closely the strategy of speech reporting in these languages. Okay? So, while this sentence can be translated roughly as Musa gathered hay, saying, beware, it might rain, the second does not parallel any kind of speech reporting strategy. And this is also very telling because in archi, speech reporting strategy, as in many languages, extends very far, extends to many different constructions, just as in the web, but not to this construction. So I think this is an important point.
But thinking could be seen as a sort of...
Normally you have boli in archi, easily have a boli in construction of thinking.
So
as I said, archi does extend the speech reporting construction outside actual speech reporting and use exactly the same construction, the converb of say, but not to this construction. It seems to be that boli, the speech construction, cannot be applied to this. So, no complementation in archi, the use of reported speech strategy in the web. So, if the apprehensive in archi seems to be both in its origin, possible origins from one system, and in its use seems to be a subordinated form, also used in non-subordinated constructions as a, so kind of also used in non-subordinated construction independently in the apprehensive sense, as we saw. In the web, it seems that the strategy is different. You have an independent finite form, main clause form, which is subordinated to express the same meaning by means of translating it into kind of extended speech reporting construction. So my explanation for that, this is a summary of what I just said. My explanation for that, possible explanation, this is again something which you can know, is that it looks like the source of grammaticalization for archi was dependent use, which then extended to independent use, to the main clause. While it is very clear that for web, the source of grammaticalization is the main clause, at least from a graph, it's very clear. It's clearer actually than for actually, which is extended to subordinate negative purpose construction. So the lesson that I would like to take from this story is that you have a functionally similar category with a similar extension, observed contemporary extension, synchronic scope of this construction. If both constructions are used as true apprehensives, beware lest dog might bite you, and both of them are used in some kind of negative purpose subordinate clauses. But the story behind these two grammaticalization tests are different. And also see that in Ahbab, you see this construction, if it is supposed to go in this direction towards negative purpose, it didn't go this way yet. Maybe we'll never do it because we are not so sure that Ahbab will exist enough to go down this path. But what I wanted to say that this is the case where the two different sources and two different targets are in kind of mirror relation. And the grammaticalization processes, which are probably due to convergence, to the areal convergence, because we started with the idea that apprehensive is not a very common morphological category, cross-linguistic. Again, another rare, relatively rare morphological category. It's attested in the Australian languages, some other languages, but morphological apprehensives are not very common. In South Daghestan, they do not exist. They do not seem to exist, any kind of dedicated constructions, even. Or maybe, I'm not so sure about constructions. Forms certainly do not exist. But in North Daghestan, you have these two languages. You also have this reported negative purpose construction in Avar and in other things. So, the same result is obtained by different grammaticalization histories. This is not unique, of course. We know other cases where you go different paths, you go by different paths and arrive to the same point, destination point. But here you have the target is still there. The target is still there also. Oh, sorry, the source is still there in the function. The source is still in the function. And so, at first glance, the two categories look exactly the same, right? They are used both as apprehensives and subordinate clause. But the story it's not the same development. It's convergence, reciprocal convergence. I would say. That's what I hear. Just for a lack of a better word, called reciprocal grammaticalization. When you move towards each other and you result in a very similar function. So that was another story that I wanted to mention because this is also about interpreting linguistic convergence, even though it's not so much at the same level of methodological questions as in the previous result. So now I'm done. Minus 6 minutes, but if you want to discuss something with me, I'm here.